The White House now says Donald Trump is open to having Ukraine's president join this Friday's high-stakes summit with Vladimir Putin in Alaska. Both Volodymyr Zelenskyy and leaders of the allied nations insist Ukraine must have a place at the table for the talks to be meaningful. These maps show how the 3.5-year war has changed the face of Ukraine. On the left, the colored sections show the land annexed or controlled by Russia and separatist forces back in 2022. On the right, the huge swath of territory that Moscow forces have captured since, representing now about 20% of the country. CBC's Julia Chapman is following developments. She joins us now from London. So, Julia, what is the prospect of Zelenskyy and Putin attending this Alaska summit together?
Well, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance has just given an interview to Fox News where he said the U.S. is in the process of scheduling a meeting between Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelenskyy. But he said any such meeting ahead of the Trump-Putin summit would not be productive. Now, that suggests that a trilateral meeting on Friday isn't being discussed. But J.D. Vance says dialogue is key to ending the war in Ukraine. Here's some of what he had to say.
Fundamentally, this is something where the president needs to force President Putin and President Zelenskyy really to sit down to figure out their differences. We, of course, condemn the invasion that happened. We don't like that this is where things are, but you've got to make peace here. And the only way to make peace is to sit down and talk. You can't finger point. You can't, wag your finger at somebody and say, you're wrong, we're right. The way to peace is to have a decisive leader sit down and force people to come together.
Whether or not Zelenskyy is involved in Friday's talks, J.D. Vance insisted that there is an open dialogue with Ukraine. The White House, as you say, has said it's open to a trilateral meeting in principle, but the Kremlin has requested that Trump and Putin meet alone. Vladimir Putin said last week that the conditions for him to meet his Ukrainian counterpart haven't yet been met. Many analysts say that those conditions are unrealistic and that Putin has no intention of having a meeting with Zelenskyy. And if he doesn't, the Ukrainians are skeptical that their interests will be sufficiently represented. Donald Trump has spoken of swapping territory as part of a U.S. proposal, something that Kyiv has already ruled out. It's been setting out some of its red lines, and it's trying to make those very clear to the U.S. side ahead of the summit on Friday.
It's interesting, Julie. I mean, it feels like this summit, the shape of the summit is changing, but the Americans are only willing to go so far. So take us through how Zelenskyy and the European allies that you're hearing from are reacting to word of this big summit in Alaska.
Well, there is concern in Kyiv and other European capitals that when Trump and Putin meet, they'll try to force an unfavorable deal on Ukraine. The European Union's foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, has called an extraordinary meeting of foreign ministers on Monday. She says the U.S. has the power to force Russia to negotiate seriously, but she insisted that any deal shouldn't be a springboard for further Russian aggression, expressing a fear that many have that if Ukrainian land is given to Russia, that Vladimir Putin will try to go after other countries, for example, the Baltics. European leaders, including those from the UK, France and Germany, issued a statement overnight. They said that Ukraine has the freedom of choice over its own destiny. Meaningful negotiations can only take place in the context of a ceasefire or reduction of hostilities. The path to peace in Ukraine cannot be decided without Ukraine. And they went on to say that borders mustn't be changed by force. Many in Ukraine and Europe are concerned about their security, fearing that Friday's summit won't take into account their interests. But J.D. Vance, as we've been hearing, says they are working to find a negotiated settlement that won't make everyone happy, but will allow them to live in peace.
Very interesting to hear about concerns from the EU of precedent being set. CBC's Julia Chapman in London. Thank you. For more analysis on this from the perspective of Ukraine, we're joined by Ukrainian MP Kira Rudik. She joins us from Kyiv. Kira, thank you for making the time. So Friday's ceasefire deadline came and went kind of just with a bit of a murmur, not so much a big deal considering how much Trump was talking about it before. And now the U.S. president is going to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin next Friday to discuss ending this war in Ukraine. How surprised are you that this is where we now find ourselves?
Hello, Eli, and thank you so much for having me. I wouldn't say that we are surprised. I would say we are very skeptical here. First, because every previous time when President Trump was talking to Putin or trying to negotiate with Putin, Putin would attack Kyiv brutally with the drones and missiles. And this is why right now we are only concerned if we will be able to sustain yet another attack on our country. Second question is, basically, President Trump didn't get anything of Putin, neither ceasefire nor any agreement to do anything, and he hasn't used any of the cards that he has in hand, including sanctions, tariffs, additional military support to Ukraine. So we are right now at this sort of stalemate where everybody's concentrated on a simple question is, what would they discuss in Alaska? But not on the hard question is, who or what will make sure that Russia would keep their part of the bargain? This is, for some reason, has not been discussed.
Here, you talk about Trump not using his cards, and it's interesting because his tone coming up to this summit was actually quite harsh on Putin, and then seems to have changed. Do you have any hypothesis in terms of what happened? I mean, weeks ago he was talking tough, he was talking about a deadline, talking about how frustrated he was about Putin's actions, and now here we are and much hoopla about this upcoming summit.
If we look to what President Trump has been saying since before he was in office, things were going up and down so many times that honestly, we are not surprised, we are not concerned. People have gone through this ups and downs so many times here that I do not even answer to the questions when they are coming from the front line of what is there again. We are concentrated on ourselves. We understand that there are so many influences involved, and there were many attempts by President Trump to try and end the war, try have some deal with Putin, especially the recent visit of envoy Steve Witkoff perhaps gave Trump like some additional proposals that he's considering. We do not know. But again, the question remains the following. Even if you agree with Putin onto something, how do you guarantee it? What will happen if he breaks his part of the deal? What will happen if he breaks his part of the deal when President Trump is not in office?
Right.
And I think these are the most important questions that we need to be tackling here.
So Zelenskyy is not going to be meeting directly with Putin, not anytime soon, according to what we're hearing, but you are hearing offers of support from the EU. How is that playing right now in Ukraine?
So we understand that European countries are as concerned as we are, because appeasement of Russia will mean the hurdle of the security of all Europe. And again, if they stop in Ukraine, they will regroup and they will attack Europe somewhere else. And it seems that everybody starts to realizing this. We appreciate that our European allies are standing firm and supportive. But the main question is still like, has everything been done to exhaust all the other options in supporting Ukraine? Where are the sanctions that the European leaders has promised when they were here in Kyiv in May? I think right now is a good time for everyone to push as hard as they can in what is in their capacity. And this is why we are hoping that European leaders will not only show their support, but actually come to execute on some of the promises that have been made, including the sanctions on Russian shadow fleet and including sanctions on Russian oil.
So you talk about sanctions, but Trump has actually surfaced this idea that the agreement would involve some swapping of territories. Now, Zelenskyy has already said Ukraine will not surrender any territory to Russia, but given that contradiction there, what is at stake for Ukraine? Are Ukrainians willing to actually sacrifice territory for a long, fought for peace?
Eli, when people are asking those questions, like, are you ready to swap the territories? It's just useless question without an answer. How do we make sure that in a year Russia would not take those territories back? And before you answer this question, like, there is no talk about swapping territories, agreements, anything. because we have been in those so-called ceasefires with them since 2014, dozens, if not 100 times, when they were breaking their part of the deal, and the world was watching and was being concerned. This is why people are not even considering this as some reality, because the question about how do we move forward from here is not being answered. This is why here everybody is very skeptical. Before you talk about pressuring Russia into doing what they have said that they will do, like it's just pointless.
Well, there is so much of a drumbeat as we get closer and closer to that summit, so it's very useful to hear your perspective from inside Ukraine. Thank you so much, Kira, for joining us. That's Kira Rudik. She is a Ukrainian MP and joined us from Kyiv.